In this section, we're going to introduce the idea of an exponential function and talk about evaluating an exponential function and graphing an exponential function. So to begin with, an exponential function is one where the exponent is your variable. Okay, so by that I mean that the x in the equation is in the exponent of the function. All right, for example, you can see here, if you look right there at this example, f of x is equal to 2 to the x. The x is the exponent in the problem. So when that happens, you have an exponential function. The 2 is referred to as the base. And you have just a little bit of a stipulation on what numbers can be the base. You are told that it has to be a number greater than 0, so you're not allowed to have a base that's negative. And you're also told that the base cannot equal 1. But otherwise, you can have any number n for the base raised to the x power, and you have an exponential function. Now, if we think about the graph of an exponential function, I have this one graphed for you. And you can just see that we've plotted some points and connected them. This is the graph of most exponential functions. So most exponential functions are going to look exactly like what you've got here on the screen. It is possible that you would have this same curve sort of mirrored in the other direction. So it's possible that the curve might do something more like this instead of like this, like it's going. But otherwise, the curves all take on that same curved shape. So you just want to keep that in mind. All right, so the things that we're going to learn in this section, we're going to first talk about evaluating an exponential function at a particular value. So we're going to start with that f of x is equal to 2 to the x power, and we're going to evaluate it at 6, and at -4, and at 0. Now, remember that when we have notation like this, all it means is that you're going to take the number that's in the parentheses and you're going to plug it in for x. So this f of 6 that we have here on the first problem, we're going to take our base of 2, and instead of raising it to the x power, we're going to raise it to the 6th power. Now, in order to do that, we're going to simply put it in our calculator, all right? And I'm going to show you that in just a second, but let's go ahead and kind of get these things set up, and then we'll come back and put the answers in. All right, so for f of -4, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take our base of 2, which is in the problem, and we're going to raise it to the -4 power. And then finally, on our last one, f of 0, we're going to take our 2, which is our base in our function. Okay, remember that we're using the 2 because it's right here. And then we're going to raise it to the 0 power. Now, as I said, the easiest way for you to evaluate these is to use your calculator. All right, so I have shown you here how this is going to look on a TI-83 or a TI-84 calculator. Now, if you have something different, you may need to play around with your calculator a little bit and see how you're going to enter it in. All right, but you can see that the first one that I've entered in is 2 to the 6th, and it's going to equal 64. All right, so the way that I entered that in on this calculator was that I put the 2 in, and then I used this key. That key is going to create an exponent for you where you can then enter in the 6. Okay, so we have 64 for the first one. For the second one, 2 to the -4, and we're just going to leave these things in decimal form. So this is going to be 0.06. We could do some rounding if we wanted to, or we can just write it out either way. All right, and then this last one, 2 to the 0, I didn't press enter yet, but when I do press it, I know that anything to the 0 power is going to equal 1. All right, and so we'll have that. All right, so that's those first 3. I want to try it one more time with you, just give you one more example. So I'm going to do one where we've got a fraction, and it's going to work the same way. So our original function is g of x is equal to 3/2 in parentheses raised to the x power. And so we're going to go through and we're going to plug these functions into our calculator and evaluate. So each time you do it, you're going to have that base of 3/2, and you're going to be raising it to the x power, which for this first example, x is being played by 2. So we'll enter that in our calculator exactly like you see on the screen. Okay, and again, we're using this key for the exponent. And we can see that the answer is going to be 2.25. You can try this on your calculator and make sure that you know how to enter it in. Okay, well, the next one we'll enter in the same way, but we've got a negative exponent, so we're going to do 3/2, and we're going to raise it to the negative third power. Now this is quite a long decimal, so instead of writing this entire decimal out, I'm going to go ahead and do some rounding. I think I'm going to round it to 2 decimal places. Actually I'm going to go 3. So I'm going to go 0.296. And you would just want to follow the directions on My Math Lab as far as how it asks you to round. So if it asks you to round to 3 decimal places, we would go 0.296. If it asks you to go to 2 decimal places, you would go 0.30 in this case. Okay, and then the last one, we have 3/2, and we're raising it to the 0 power. And again, anything raised to the 0 power is going to always equal 1. All right, but you can plug that in your calculator as well and see that that's the case. All right, so hopefully that feels pretty easy, just typing those in your calculator and getting answers out. All right, the other thing that we need to be able to do is we need to be able to graph an exponential function. So I want to look at a couple of examples there with you on that. All right, and again, I'm using my TI-83 or a TI-84 calculator. If you have something different, you probably need to kind of play with it and see how you can graph. And you're welcome to shoot me an email and ask questions if you're not sure how to graph on your calculator. All right, so we have the first function is f of x is equal to 2 to the x power. So I'm going to enter it in on the y equals screen, which means that I'm going to type this key first. And that's going to allow me to then enter an equation in. So after that key is pressed, I'm going to push the 2 button. And then I'm going to come over here and hit my caret key, which is going to raise me to the exponent. And then here's the button that I'm going to use to get the x on the calculator screen. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so that should enable you to get your graph entered in. And then once you do that, you're going to press this key. This is your graph button, and it should give you a graph that looks like what we have over here. Okay, and again, if you have problems here, please let me know, and we'll see what we can do towards getting that graph correctly on your calculator. Okay, so let's look at one more. So we'll take our other equation, our 3/2 to the x power, and we'll kind of go through the same steps so that you see it one more time. The first thing that you need to do is press the y equals key, which is here. That takes you to the screen where you are able to enter in equations. Okay, you have a parenthesis key sort of towards the middle of your calculator. It's just off my picture here, so kind of down towards the middle here, there's a key for a parenthesis. You can press that and enter in the 3 and the divided by 2 and close the parenthesis. And then once you get that entered in, you're going to use this key, which will raise your cursor up to the exponent level. You're going to type the X button and then press the graph key. All right, and you should get a graph that looks like that. And you can notice that that graph looks very similar to the first one. It's just a little bit wider.